I've come to a truth that might surprise some people. I am an angry black woman, and I'm okay with that. But what I refuse to be is a bitter black bitch. Hello, my pretties, and welcome back to Pretty Intentional, the podcast where beauty, lifestyle, and personal growth meet honesty, self reflection, and real life. I'm your host, Candice Coleman, and today's conversation is one I've been sitting with for quite some time. It's layered, it's personal, and it's one I think a lot of black women don't always feel safe having out loud. Today, we're talking about anger versus bitterness. And before I go any further, I do want to give some context because my relationship with anger didn't start in adulthood. I grew up in a predominantly white area until about 16 years old. And then after that, I went on to attend PWIs. So from a very young age, I was often one of the only black girls, or sometimes the only one in the room. And when you grow up like that, you learn very early that your emotions are being watched. Your tone is being interpreted. Your reactions are being analyzed. Your feelings aren't just yours, they're seen as representative. So the fear of being labeled the angry black woman wasn't theoretical for me. It was very real, and it shaped how I learned to express or suppress myself. I spent a lot of my life trying not to be perceived that way. I softened my delivery, I over explained, I swallowed discomfort. I even made myself smaller so no one could misunderstand me. But as I've gotten older, as I've lived, healed, lost, learned, and grown, I've come to a truth that might surprise some people. I am an angry black woman, and I'm okay with that. But what I refuse to be is a bitter black bitch. And there is a real difference. Growing up in predominantly white spaces teaches you a very specific kind of emotional awareness. And I didn't have the luxury of just being. I had to be palatable, approachable, non threatening. If I was quiet, I was reserved. If I spoke up, I was intense. If I showed frustration, I was too much. I mean, hell, even my own father, when I expressed emotions, would tell me I was like a little ball of evil. And what that does, especially to a young black girl, is it trains you to police yourself before anyone else ever has to. I learned how to monitor my face, which I don't always do the best with, monitor my tone and my body language. And not because I was doing anything wrong, but because I understood that anger coming from me would be read differently than anger coming from others. And then going on to PWIs only reinforced that lesson. In classrooms, social spaces, and later professional environments, I became hyper aware that if I expressed frustration, disappointment, or firmness, it could quickly be mischaracterized. So instead of asking, is my anger valid? I was asking, how will this be perceived? And that disconnect, that separation from your own emotional truth is where things begin to shift internally. Because anger doesn't just disappear because you suppress it, it waits. There's another layer to this that we can't ignore, especially right now in this political climate. Being perceived as an angry black woman doesn't just affect how you're liked, it can affect how you're treated, how you're labeled, how safe you feel expressing yourself. There's a heightened awareness that everything is being recorded, quoted, reposted, and taken out of context. So the pressure to perform calm, to be measured, agreeable, non reactive, feels heavier than ever. And that pressure doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from watching how black women are talked about in public discourse, how our anger is framed as aggression instead of concern, how emotional expression is politicized. So when I say I spent years managing my anger, it wasn't just personal, it was strategic. And while awareness can be protective, it can also become constraining. Because when you're constantly monitoring yourself for safety or optics, you're not processing emotion, you're containing it. And containment over time is what turns anger into bitterness. And I do also want to say this because it matters. There are moments in history when complacency is comfortable, and there are moments when complacency is dangerous. This is not a time where silence equals peace. This is a time where awareness matters, discernment matters, and yes, anger matters. Because anger, when it's grounded in truth, is often the first sign that something is wrong, that something needs attention, that something requires action. If we remove anger entirely, what we're really removing is urgency. And Black women historically have always been asked to stay calm in moments when calmness benefited everyone except us. So when I say I'm an angry Black woman, I don't mean chaotic. I don't mean unhinged. I mean awake. I mean paying attention. I mean refusing to be lulled into comfort while harm continues. I mean choosing engagement over apathy. There's a difference between anger that mobilizes and bitterness that paralyzes. Anger says this matters, and bitterness says nothing will change. And in times like these, we cannot afford to confuse the two. And quite frankly, I would rather be awake and uncomfortable than calm and complicit. So let us be clear, anger and bitterness are not the same thing. Anger is an emotion. It's present tense, it's responsive, it has energy, it moves. Anger says something here isn't right. Anger says I deserved better. Anger can motivate change. It can clarify boundaries. It can tell the truth. Bitterness, on the other hand, is what happens when anger has nowhere to go. Bitterness is stagnant. It lives in the past. It loops the same story over and over again. It hardens you. Anger is a visitor. Bitterness becomes a resident. Black women carry a lot, and for that, we deserve our anger. We carry responsibility. We carry expectation. We carry strength, often without consent. Many of us watched our mothers and grandmothers endure silently. We learned that survival meant endurance, not expression. But the truth is, two things can be true at the same time. You can be graceful and angry. You can be feminine and angry. You can be soft and angry. Anger does not cancel your divinity. Sometimes anger is the most honest thing in the room. And instead of asking, why am I so angry? I've learned to ask, what is this anger protecting in me? Because your anger is not a flaw, it's data, and it tells you what to care about. Bitterness usually doesn't come from one big moment. It comes from accumulation, from staying too long, from not being believed, from minimizing your pain, from telling yourself it's not that serious. Bitterness grows when anger is internalized instead of expressed. And when you don't give anger a voice, it finds another outlet. Sarcasm, cynicism, emotional withdrawal, constant irritation. And the thing about bitterness is that it doesn't arrive loudly, but it settles in quietly. And before bitterness ever takes hold, there are usually quiet signs. And these are the self-checks I come back to when I want to stay honest with myself and make sure like I'm not becoming bitter. Number one, am I replaying the same hurt without movement? If I'm telling myself the same story over and over, but nothing is changing, that's not processing. That's looping. And healing creates motion. Bitterness creates repetition. 2, has my anger turned into cynicism? When everything starts feeling annoying, fake, pointless, or exhausting, that's a signal. Because anger has clarity, but bitterness has contempt. 3, am I withholding softness as protection? If I notice myself becoming emotionally unavailable, guarded, or closed off just in case, I pause. Protection is necessary, but permanent armor hardens you. 4, do I feel justified in staying stuck? Bitterness often disguises itself as righteousness. I have a right to feel this way can quietly become I refuse to move forward. And two things can be true. Your pain is valid and you deserve relief. 5. Am I expressing my truth or performing strength? Because strength without expression turns into suppression, and suppression always finds another outlet. And 6, have I allowed anger to lead to a boundary or a decision? If anger hasn't changed anything, a conversation, a choice, or a boundary, it's likely being stored instead of released. Because if my anger isn't leading me somewhere, it might be turning into something else. And I also want to touch on something gently but honestly, because we don't talk about it enough. Unprocessed emotions don't just live in the mind, they live in the body. Bitterness, chronic resentment, prolonged stress, emotional suppression keeps the nervous system in a constant state of defense. And when your body is always bracing, it doesn't get to repair, regulate, or rest. Over time, that can show up as chronic tension in the neck, shoulders, and jaw, digestive issues, fatigue that rest doesn't fix, headaches or migraines, inflammation, autoimmune flare ups, anxiety and sleep disruption, and even cancer. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Your body keeps the score, but not to punish you, but to get your attention. Sometimes illness isn't random. Sometimes it's the body saying, I've been carrying this too long. Back in 2019, I started having back issues. It would be like in between my shoulders. It'd be days at a time. I could never get comfortable. Nothing worked. Stress balls, stretching, Pilates, even medication, Flexerol, nothing worked. I went to go see a chiropractor because the flare-ups would happen quite often and I was scared. What I found out was that I had scoliosis, specifically a 2 to 3 degree curvature in my spine in between my shoulders. When I shared this information with my therapist, what she told me was, I'm not discrediting the diagnosis that your chiropractor gave you, but I do also want to let you know that I fully believe that this is your trauma manifesting in your body, and it's in between your shoulders because you are carrying shit that you have no business carrying. Gagged and RuPaul'd I was. But this is why releasing anger safely, intentionally, and compassionately is not just emotional work, it's physical care. Softness, rest, expression, boundaries, they're not luxuries. They're a part of staying well. So when I choose to process anger instead of holding on to bitterness, I'm not just protecting my spirit, I'm protecting my body, my energy, my future. And that choice again and again is what keeps me open instead of hardened. So how do we honor anger without letting it harden inside of us? We name it, we feel it without performing, we listen to what it's pointing to, we let it lead to action, a boundary, a choice, a release, and then we let it go. And after that, we then return to softness, not as weakness, but as restoration. Because softness is how you refill what anger stirred up. There was a moment in my life where I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could honor my anger and grow, or I could ignore it and become bitter. And choosing myself meant choosing honesty, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant letting go of versions of myself that survived but no longer served me. And that choice changed everything. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this conversation, it's this. Anger is not the enemy. Bitterness is. And knowing the difference is a form of self-love. You are allowed to be angry, righteously, intentionally, beautifully. Just don't let that anger turn sour inside you. You deserve too much softness, too much joy, and too much life for that. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Pretty Intentional. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a comment. You can follow me at Candice OBD on all platforms, and be sure to follow Pretty Intentional as well. Remember, being intentional isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up for yourself in your journey. Until next time.